requirements for mortgage companies would apply. If we can demonstrate the levee meets the standards, do the improvements, there would be no expected changes. If the levee does not meet the standards, the rates would go up. Again, if you're getting the preferred rate, you'd be looking at about $1,300. Depending on whether you're grandfathered in or not, that rate would jump to $3,700 to $4,200. One of the ways we started, as part of this work, we realized that this is a big implications for the city, that they don't have this money just sitting around ready for a use like this. So we worked with, made several phone calls, did some research to try and find out, what are some of the funding options out there. So we've got a list below. These are, again, are possibilities. There's no guarantees, and some of them are, or most of them are competitive. So it's based on the need as you're competing against other cities and counties and that. The DNR has some remaining funds left from the 2007 disaster assistance program. And I might direct Pat to talk about these two if you would, and also there was some funding through the bonding bill. I don't know if you can add anything to that, Pat.
Thanks, Art. Mayor, City Council, thank you for having me down. After I started this job, by the way, my name is Pat Lynch. I'm the Flood Hazard Mitigation Grant Program Manager at the DNR Division of Waters. And I started in this position about 3 months after your flood down here. I spent the last 18 years working in the Scott and Dakota County, so I didn't know much about southeast Minnesota till I started this job. But the 2007 special session of the legislature passed a disaster relief bill, and quite frankly, I can't remember the total dollar amount of that package, but DNR Waters, where I work, we received $2 million in flood hazard mitigation grant funds to be distributed in the disaster area, the DR 1717 area, plus $500,000 for debris removal. One pretty significant component of that disaster relief bill was language in it that allowed agencies to transfer money amongst one another. If one agency had money it couldn't spend, they could transfer it to another agency who could spend it. So again, we received $2 million in flood mitigation funds directly through the appropriation, plus an additional $6.4 million from other agencies who couldn't spend their money. DEED, for example, some funds from the Historical Society, Department of Human Services, and a few others. Those funds, the $8.4 million in mitigation funds that we had at our disposal to award to communities down here, were completely under contract by June 30th, 2008. There was a legislative deadline to get those funds encumbered. So we did that. And included in that $8.some million was $282,000 to the city of Rushford to provide the engineering and geotechnical work to determine what needed to be done to make the flood control system here certifiable, if you will. Another key thing about that disaster relief bill is that the grants we awarded didn't require any local match. So typically under the flood damage reduction grant program that I work with, there's a 50-50, 50% local match, 50% state. There are some exceptions in the bonding bill, but by and large it's a 50-50 cost share program. Again, down here, this particular disaster relief bill and the sources of funding allowed us to provide zero match grants. Many of the communities down here have finished some finished projects that they had grants for, and they came under budget, or some people opted out of buyouts, etc., resulting in some monies returned to the DNR available for reallocation. So and Art's right, they are remaining 2007 disaster funds, but all of them at one time were under contract. We weren't sitting on extra money. So it's money that's being turned back. And right now, I'll know a lot more probably in the middle of January. A lot of the contracts have a December 31, 2009 end date. So as people clean up their projects, get their final billings in, I'll have a pretty good idea of how much additional funds we will have available. But I have had conversations with Mr. Block and Art Kelmus, and right now I'm thinking there's probably at least $240,000 additional 2007 funds that would be no local match funds available to the city. There's still an open contract of that original $282,000. I think it's nearly exhausted. I think there's $3,000 left, but the key thing there is it's still an open contract. So it is a very, very simple process to amend that contract to augment it with additional funds. So I fully anticipate we will be amending that contract with the city to provide, again, probably $230,000, $240,000, maybe more. That still leaves you with a fairly significant unmet need. And that would lead us to the bonding funds through the state, and that's typically on an every other year, an even year cycle. I would encourage the city to work with their local legislators to ensure inclusion in the 2010 bonding bill. The department has sent their list. We've been asked to prepare a list of where we anticipate money would be spent if we got money, and we fully intend we will. We've identified about $110 million in what I'll call short-term needs across the state for flood hazard mitigation. And that short-term being the next biennium, the next 2-year cycle. We aren't going to get $110 million in the next bonding bill. We don't know what we'll get, but my guess is it'll be somewhere between $20 million and $50 million for the biennium to be divvied up across the state. And again, there are an awful lot of folks that have need. There's awful lot of folks that have received PAL letters, as Rushford has. There's a lot of projects that have been ongoing for several years that need to be finished and closed, and we would intend to fund some of those. And there's some federal projects where we leverage federal money. We get a lot of bang for the buck when we provide some of the local share, and the feds pick up typically 65% or more. But it's key to make sure that the city gets listed in the 2010 bonding bill. Typically, again, it's a 50-50 cost share. However, the last several bonding bills have included some language limiting the local share to a very, very, well, depending on the community, but it limits the communities to what we call it the 2% of the median household income. In other words, for projects, large projects occurring in small communities that don't have the financial wherewithal to perform these projects, they can be listed in the bonding bill, the community listed in the bonding bill as being eligible for funding under what we call the 2% median household income. And what we do is we look at the latest census data we have, and we look at the number of households in a community times the median household income in the community, and we multiply that by 2%. And that's an easy number to generate, and I probably should have thought to get you that number for tonight. I don't know what that would be in Rushford. But that will probably be a fairly small number, less than 50% of what your needs are. And I don't need to get, I guess, into all the nitty-gritty details of how that works, but again, it's key to make sure that Rushford's name shows up on the bonding bill along with all the other communities around the state that are vying for dollars, Grand Falls and Montevideo and Roseville and Breckenridge and Austin and everyone else.